Imagine you're translating a 2,000-year-old letter.
Right.
You know, you are hovering over the text and you're mapping out every single noun, every verb, every participle with just absolute surgical precision.
Oh, yeah. The classic seminary approach.
Exactly. You know exactly what a genitive absolute is doing in verse 3. You know the lexical root of, like, every single word.
Because you've got the flashcards memorized.
Right. But then, and here's where the frustration sets in for so many of you listening, you step into the pulpit, or you sit down to write a commentary, and you read the passage out loud. And it just feels entirely dead.
Yeah, it falls flat.
It really does. I mean, you have successfully translated the individual words, sure, but you realize you've completely missed the author's tone, their hidden demands, their power plays. The actual life of the text is just missing.
That feeling of holding a dead text is incredibly common.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it usually happens because of the way we were taught to read it in the first place.
Okay, unpack that a little.
Uh,
Well, when you look at language solely as a system of rigid prescriptive rules, which, let's be honest, is how most of us learned Koine Greek, you end up doing an autopsy instead of having a conversation.
Man, I can personally attest to that autopsy feeling. You know, coming from a background in traditional historical grammatical exegesis, you develop this very specific, almost mechanical reflex.
A parsing reflex.
Exactly. You encounter a Greek clause, you pull out your BDAG lexicon, and you parse. You label the verb, you know, aorist, active, indicative, third person singular.
You put it in its neat little box.
Right. You neatly categorize the datals. I mean, I have spent years drawing complex syntax trees.
Why,
And it is incredibly precise and it yields a lot of data. But when I try to explain the theological weight or the emotional punch of a passage to you, the listener, I often hit a wall. It feels atomistic.
Because it is atomistic.
Yeah. We describe the anatomy of the sentence flawlessly, but we somehow lose the pulse of the discourse. I know what the words are, but I struggle to explain why the author chose those specific words over others to accomplish their actual goal.
Well, the limitation you're bumping up against there is the fundamental flaw of a purely formalist, rules-based model of grammar.
Okay.
In that traditional model, we basically look at a text and ask a binary question. We ask, does this conform to the grammatical rule or not?
Right. Is it right or wrong?
Exactly. We treat language as this static repository of abstract laws, almost like a quality control test at a factory. But language, especially a text as vibrant and, historically situated as the Greek New Testament, it does not operate like a math equation. It's just not a static list of rights and wrongs.
And that frustration, that desire to move beyond the flashcards, that is exactly the engine for this deep dive today.
It's a necessary shift.
It really is.
Yeah.
So we are exploring a massive paradigm shift in biblical studies, coming from a field called systemic functional linguistics, or SFL. And if you are an intellectually curious learner who really wants to understand the actual mechanics of how ancient texts manipulate and persuade, SFL changes everything.
It shatters the old paradigm completely. I mean, SFL was developed primarily by the linguist M.A.K. Halliday.
Right.
And the absolute bedrock premise of Halliday's framework is that language is a social semiotic.
Okay, let's slow down right there and define our terms, because social semiotic sounds like something you would just gloss over in a graduate seminar.
It does sound heavy.
Yeah. So semiotic deals with signs and symbols, right? How meaning is created.
Correct.
And social implies that happens between people. So a social semiotic perspective means what exactly?
It means we view language fundamentally as a resource. It's a resource used by human beings to make meaning within specific social contexts.
A resource, not a rule book.
Exactly. It completely inverts the traditional Chomskyan model that focuses on abstract cognitive rules.
Yeah.
In SFL, we move from a rules-based model to a functional resource-based model. The only reason language has the structural syntactical architecture it does is because of what human beings need it to do for them. It's a functioning tool used to interact, to negotiate power, and to construe our experience of the world.
So grammar is not a set of constraints we are forced to obey. It's more like a toolbox we're reaching into.
That's a great way to put it.
And SFL argues that grammar is, at its core, a system of meaningful choices. And because language is this massive network of interrelated systems, choosing one grammatical form inherently carries meaning based on what was not chosen.
Yes, the friction between the selected option and the rejected options is exactly where the meaning lives.
That is
Let's
fascinating.
step away from ancient Greek for a second and look at a modern everyday interaction, because SFL applies to all human language.
Okay, let's go.
Let's say you and your roommate are sitting on the couch.
Right.
You have a pragmatic goal. You want a cup of tea. Now, you have a vast grammatical resource available to achieve that goal.
Right.
If you look at your roommate and say, "Make me some tea," you have selected an imperative clause.
Which is a very dangerous choice depending on the roommate.
Very dangerous. You are demanding goods and services from a position of presumed authority. You're using the grammar to assert dominance.
Right.
But let's say you want to mitigate that social risk. You look at them and ask, "Are you thirsty?"
Ah, okay.
You have selected an interrogative clause. Ostensibly, on a surface literal level, you're simply demanding information about their hydration status.
Just a harmless question.
Right. But functionally, you are indirectly trying to achieve the exact same goal, prompting them to get up, go to the kitchen, and hopefully put the kettle on for both of you.
That is such a clarifying distinction. The choice of a softer interrogative over a direct, bossy imperative completely shifts the social dynamic in the room.
It really does.
The speaker is doing subtle human architecture. They are negotiating status, politeness, and the relational hierarchy, all through a subconscious grammatical choice.
Exactly. The words aren't just conveying information about tea. They are managing the relationship.
Wow. And SFL says that the authors of the Greek New Testament, like Paul, John, Luke, they are doing the exact same thing, just with the highly complex grammatical resources of Koine Greek.
They are deploying those resources with extreme deliberation. And realizing this brings us to a crucial duality in SFL. We have to view the text simultaneously as a process and as an artifact.
Okay, artifact and process. Let's tackle process first.
Sure. When we view a text as a process, we are observing its inner unfolding world. Meaning isn't static on the page. It unfolds in real time.
Like it's moving.
Yes, every new clause builds upon the one before it, it reacts to it, and sets the stage for the one after it. It is an active, dynamic event in the mind of the reader.
So it's like watching a path being paved one brick at a time rather than just looking at a map of the completed road.
Exactly.
But you also said we have to view it as an artifact.
Right. Viewing it as an artifact means stepping back and recognizing the text as a completed object in its own right. It's a significant historical and social moment.
Okay, I'm with you.
The text is not just ancient speech written down. It is a permanent imprint on human history. And it derives its cultural power from how it uniquely utilized the shared meaning-making resources of its specific community.
Can you give me an example of that?
Think about Nelson Mandela's inaugural speech in 1994.
Okay, yeah. Let's look at that.
As an artifact, that speech changed the trajectory of a nation. But it didn't do so by magic.
Right.
It did so by drawing on the precise linguistic resources, the specific vocabulary of unity, the shared historical grief, and the grammatical structures available in that exact historical and cultural context of post-apartheid South Africa.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you translated that exact speech into ancient Latin and read it to a Roman senator, it wouldn't have the same impact, because the artifact is intrinsically tied to its social context.
I see where you're going with this, but I have to push back here, or at least play devil's advocate for my traditional exegesis training.
Please do.
In seminary, we often treat background context and the grammatical text as two totally separate steps.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, step 1, read a history book about 1st century Ephesus. Step 2, parse the Greek verbs in Ephesians.
Like the two-step method.
Yeah. So, if language is just this fluid, social semiotic based on choices, aren't we risking pure subjectivism here? How does SFL actually connect the words on the page to the cultural context without us just reading whatever social dynamic we want into the text?
That is the essential question.
Uh-huh.
And it's exactly where SFL proves its rigorous objective nature.
Okay.
SFL bridges that gap through a concept called stratification.
Stratification.
Yeah, language is not a flat plane. It is modeled in levels or strata. And here's the key, the extra-linguistic context, so the broader culture and the immediate situation of the text. They are not separate from the language. They are realized within it.
Realize, okay, that's another specialized term we need to crack open.
Let's do it.
It sounds almost like software code realizing a graphical user interface on my computer screen. Like the code isn't the picture itself, but the picture is the realization of the code.
That is a phenomenal metaphor. Yes, exactly.
Oh,
The
great.
social context is the underlying code, and it is realized in the semantics, which is the systems of meaning.
Right.
The semantics, in turn, are realized in the lexicogrammar.
Which is the actual vocabulary and syntax, the nouns and verbs.
Exactly. And finally, the lexicogrammar is realized in phonology or graphology, the spoken sounds or the written letters on the parchment.
So it's a chain of manifestation.
Yes.
That implies a dynamic, reversible relationship then. If the extra-linguistic context is literally realized in the text, that means the text, in turn, reveals its context.
That's the beauty of it.
So if I am analyzing a completely disembodied, anonymous text, the objective linguistic patterns alone should allow me to accurately deduce the social setting it came from.
They absolutely should, and they do. A classic example used in linguistic training is analyzing a text called rugby notes.
Rugby notes, okay?
Yeah. You are given a piece of text without being told what it is or where it came from.
Right.
In the first half, the lexicogrammar is full of specific material processes, past tense verbs, and concrete nouns recounting physical actions.
So guys running and tackling.
Exactly. But halfway through, the grammar radically shifts. It suddenly becomes flooded with inspirational appeals, modal verbs of obligation like must and should, and second-person pronouns.
Wow, okay.
By tracking that objective shift in the lexicogrammar, you can deduce the author's underlying social goal. They transitioned from merely recounting a sports match to actively trying to foster team spirit and motivate the players for the next game.
Because context and text are inextricably bound together.
Right.
If you know the context of a situation is a simple ball game on a field,
Yeah.
you can predict the lexicogrammar. You know you will see exophoric references,
Yes.
meaning words that point outward to the physical environment, like someone yelling, "Grab that ball!"
Exactly.
You'll see imperative moods like "throw it" and material processes like "run."
And conversely, if you only have the text, grab that ball, you can reconstruct the context of a physical game. The relationship is completely complementary.
And this is where my brain starts lighting up regarding the New Testament.
It's exciting, isn't it?
It really is. In traditional parsing, it really does feel like we are dissecting a dead specimen. We isolate a word, cut it out of the sentence, and stare at it under a microscope.
Just looking at the one piece.
Yeah. But SFL is telling us the text is more like a living, breathing conversation. The social environment, the author's authority, their relationship with the audience, their classification of the world, it is all sitting right there in the syntax. It is encoded into the Greek.
It is all encoded there, but you have to know how to look at the architecture of the language to actually see it.
Right.
You can't just look for lexical definitions. You have to look at the functional lines along which language itself is organized.
Which brings us to the absolute engine of SFL, the three metafunctions.
Here we go.
If context is literally encoded into the grammar, how exactly does the language system pull that off simultaneously? How do we map this out objectively so we aren't just guessing at the author's tone?
This is perhaps the most profound conceptual leap in Halliday's framework.
Mm-hmm.
SFL argues that every single clause in every language on Earth operates on three simultaneous strands of meaning.
Three strands.
Yes, these are the three metafunctions, the ideational, the interpersonal, and the textual.
Okay.
And they are not arbitrary categories made up by linguists. They are the intrinsic functional lines of language itself.
Okay, we need to spend some serious time here. Let's walk through these systematically, but let's make sure we ground them in the Greek text for everyone listening.
Sounds good.
Let's start with the first strand, the ideational metafunction. Now, the sources describe this as language as reflection, which correlates to the field of discourse, basically what is actually taking place in the text.
Okay.
How does the ideational function construe human experience?
The ideational metafunction builds a mental picture of reality. It represents what Halliday calls goings-on.
Goings-on, okay.
And the primary grammatical system we use to analyze this is called transitivity.
Now wait, transitivity.
Yes.
We need to forget the grade school definition of transitivity, right? Like whether a verb takes a direct object or not.
Exactly. Throw that out for now. In SFL, transitivity is a semantic system that categorizes these goings-on into different process types.
Break down those process types for me.
Broadly speaking, there are three main types. First, you have material processes.
Okay.
These are verbs of doing and happening in the physical world, so running, building, striking.
Physical actions?
Right. Second, you have mental processes. These represent the inner world of sensing, feeling, and thinking. So knowing, seeing, loving.
Internal stuff.
Yes. And third, you have relational processes. These represent being and having. They establish identity or assign attributes, like saying X is Y or X has Y.
Yeah.
And these processes don't exist in a vacuum. They are surrounded by participants. So the actors doing the action or the sensors feeling the emotion, and circumstances, which give us the background details like where, when, and how.
I really want to apply this directly to the Greek New Testament, specifically to the first epistle of John.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Because when I read the SFL analysis of this in our sources, it felt like a light bulb turning on. Traditional exegesis might read 1 John and get bogged down in doing massive word studies on terms like love or light or antichrist.
Right, tracking the vocabulary.
Exactly, we track the vocabulary. But if we run an objective SFL ideational analysis on 1 John, if we just count the process types, we find a strikingly high frequency of relational processes, verbs of being and having.
Yes, the statistical dominance of relational processes in 1 John is undeniable.
It's huge.
And what does that objective grammatical pattern prove? Well, let's contrast it with something like the Gospel of Mark.
Oh.
If an author is primarily utilizing material processes, verbs like he went, they took, he healed, they're likely writing a narrative. They're relating a sequential chain of events moving through time.
Makes sense.
But John, in his epistle, relies heavily on relational processes. God is light. Everyone who loves has been born of God. Sin is lawlessness.
So if I am preaching 1 John and I try to preach it like a story moving from point A to point B, I am fighting the very grammar of the text.
You are entirely fighting the text.
Right.
The high frequency of relational processes proves that the primary field of 1 John is not narrative at all.
It's something else.
The text's primary concern is classifying. John is mapping out a taxonomy of spiritual realities. He's describing the static spiritual status of his readers and contrasting it with the status of the false teachers.
That completely changes how you teach that book. You aren't following a storyline. You are being invited to locate yourself within a classification system.
Yeah.
You are looking at a spiritual map, not a timeline. Okay, so that is the ideational metafunction, how the author uses transitivity to represent reality and build a world.
Yes.
But a text isn't just a mirror reflecting a world. It's an action taking place between people. Which brings us to the second strand, the interpersonal metafunction.
Right. The interpersonal metafunction represents language as action. This correlates to the tenor of discourse.
Tenor.
Yes, the roles, the status, the power dynamics, and the social distance between the author and the audience.
Yeah.
Here, we aren't viewing the clause as a reflection of an event. We are viewing it as an exchange.
An exchange between the writer and reader.
Exactly. The author is exchanging either information through statements and questions, or they are exchanging goods and services through offers and commands.
And the grammatical burden of this function, like the engine that drives the exchange, is carried by what SFL calls the mood block.
The mood block.
Now, I have to admit, when I first encountered the term mood block, I really struggled. I was thinking of grammatical mood, like indicative or imperative.
It's a common point of confusion.
Yeah. But SFL defines the mood block as the relationship between the subject and the finite. Can you define finite in this context?
It's a crucial distinction. In SFL, the finite is the part of the verbal group that grounds the exchange.
Grounds it how?
Well, it encodes primary tense. So is this happening past, present, or future? Or it encodes modality, probability, obligation, or willingness. The finite is what makes the proposition arguable.
Arguable.
Right. It is the hinge upon which the entire interaction swings. If I say, the apostle was here, the finite was grounds it in the past. You can argue with it by saying, no, he wasn't.
Ah, got it. So by tracking the mood block across a Greek epistle, along with systems of modality, how an author expresses probability or obligation, and appraisal, how they express their subjective attitudes and emotions, we can see exactly how the author is positioning the reader.
Yeah.
We can literally measure their relational posture.
Exactly. You are tracking shifts in person, modality, and speech roles to reveal the author's stance. You can mathematically plot their authoritative weight. That's wild. Give me a biblical example.
Think about the Apostle Paul. In the book of Galatians, his mood block choices are highly demanding. He uses stark imperatives. His modality is rigid. He is asserting high social authority to correct a crisis.
Contrast that with Philemon, where Paul is trying to persuade Philemon to free a slave.
Right.
If Paul used the Galatians grammar in Philemon, it would be a disaster.
It would completely backfire.
So instead, we see a shift in the interpersonal grammar. We see softer modality, more conditional clauses, and appeal to love rather than raw apostolic authority. The grammar softens because the social goal requires persuasion, not just dictation.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
If Paul suddenly shifts from calm third-person declarative statements to a barrage of second-person rhetorical questions, the interpersonal metafunction tells us the social distance just collapsed.
He's right in their face.
Exactly. He is putting the reader on the spot. He is demanding a cognitive response. He is using the grammar to enact a social demand. The grammar is the relationship.
Okay, so we have the ideational function, building the world, and the interpersonal function, navigating the relationship.
Right.
But if I just throw a bunch of relational processes and rhetorical questions into a blender, I just get a chaotic jumble of words.
The word salad.
Yeah. Having brilliant experiential representations means nothing if the reader can't follow the argument. And that is where the third strand comes in.
The textual metafunction, we call this the enabling function.
Enabling.
It correlates to the mode of discourse. This is the role that language is playing in the situation, the actual channel of communication.
Okay.
The textual metafunction provides the grammatical resources to weave the ideational and interpersonal meanings into a coherent, linear, intelligible message.
And the primary structural resource here is the theme and rime system. Let's break this down because this is incredibly practical for anyone trying to trace the flow of a biblical argument. What is the theme?
In SFL, the theme is the point of departure for the message.
Point of departure.
Yes. In a Greek clause, it is typically the element that comes first. It is what the clause is concerned with. It acts as the anchor that locates the new message within the reader's existing mental context. It's the author saying, okay, concerning this topic.
And the rime.
The rime is the remainder of the clause. It develops the theme. It provides the new information, the core payload that the author wants to deliver regarding that point of departure.
So by tracking the theme across a paragraph, just looking at the front of every clause, we can literally map the author's point of departure for every single step of their argument.
Clause by clause.
We can see how information flows from given information, stuff the reader already knows, to new information. It's like watching stepping stones being laid down across a river.
That's a really great way to visualize it. And the textual metafunction doesn't just use structural things like theme and rime. It also utilizes non-structural, cohesive ties to give the text what we call texture.
Texture, I love that word for a text. It implies something woven together, not just a pile of loose threads. What creates that texture?
Reference chains are a major factor.
Okay.
For example, using pronouns to track a specific participant through multiple verses so the reader doesn't lose them. Or lexical cohesion, where the repetition of related words, synonyms, antonyms, or words from the same semantic domain weaves a semantic web across the discourse.
Right, tying it all together.
Exactly. These cohesive ties are what prevent an epistle from being an unintelligible mass of data. They bind it together as a unified, functioning social tool.
All right, here's where my traditional parsing brain had a massive system reboot kind of breakthrough.
Uh-oh.
Because when we talk about these three metafunctions, the ideational, interpersonal, and textual, we are not saying that the first part of sentence is ideational, the middle is interpersonal, and the end is textual.
Yeah, well done.
SFL insists these are operating simultaneously, and the term for this is functional conflation.
Yes. Functional conflation means that a single linguistic element, a single word or phrase, performs multiple functional roles at the exact same time.
So instead of just parsing a word in isolation, like saying, this is a nominative noun, we're looking at a three-dimensional matrix.
Exactly.
Let's take a basic unmarked declarative clause in Greek, or even in English. Let's say Paul wrote the letter.
Okay.
The word Paul is a single nominal group, but under SFL, it is doing three jobs simultaneously. In the ideational metafunction, Paul is the actor. He is the one doing the material process of writing.
Right.
In the interpersonal metafunction, Paul is the subject. He's the one taking responsibility for the exchange, grounding the proposition. And in the textual metafunction, Paul is the theme. He's the point of departure for the message.
That is the elegance of functional conflation. You are seeing how the author represents reality, enacts a relationship with the reader, and organizes the flow of sought all in a single baseline grammatical choice.
But the real fireworks happen when an author intentionally breaks that conflation, right?
Oh, exactly. When an author departs from the standard unmarked pattern, they are doing it for a specific reason.
Give me an example.
Let's say an author takes a circumstance, a temporal phrase like "in those days," and moves it to the very front of the clause.
Okay.
They have broken the typical actor-subject theme conflation. By putting "in those days" at the front, they are making it the theme. They're using the textual metafunction to foreground a specific ideational meaning. They are explicitly telling the reader, stop looking at the actor for a second. Our new point of departure is this specific moment in time.
They are actively managing the cognitive intake of the audience. They are directing traffic in the reader's brain.
Yes, exactly.
Which leads perfectly into our next major area of discussion. If these three metafunctions are constantly working together, weaving this complex 3D matrix of meaning, what exactly are they building in the mind of the original ancient reader?
Right.
The SFL framework argues they're constructing a cognitive blueprint, a specific mental model.
This is a critical extension of the SFL framework for New Testament exegesis, leaning into discourse analysis. We have to understand that ancient authors do not simply transmit raw data.
They aren't just handing over a hard drive of theological facts.
No, not at all. They use highly specific, deliberate linguistic signals to guide the reader in constructing an internal cognitive representation.
A mental model.
Right. The ultimate goal of any discourse is for the reader's mental model to perfectly approximate the environment of meanings that the author originally intended.
They are building a world in your head, and they use very deliberate linguistic mechanics to do it.
Exactly.
Let's look at the concept of grounding first. How do Greek authors use grounding to create what the sources call a narrative skeleton?
Think of grounding as the mechanism that helps the reader distinguish between the essential backbone of the discourse and the supportive secondary details.
Okay.
If you run a text and everything carries the exact same weight, your brain gets overwhelmed. So we categorize discourse into mainline, which is the foreground material, and offline, which is the background material.
How does that map onto Greek verbs?
The mainline relates the primary, sequential events that form the skeletal structure of the mental model. In Koine Greek narrative, like the Gospels or Acts, this mainline is typically carried by the aorist aspect.
The aorist.
Yes. If we are in a non-narrative discourse, like one of Paul's epistles, the main line of the argument is often sustained by the present indicative.
So if we use an architectural metaphor, the aorist verbs in a gospel narrative act as the load-bearing walls of the mental house we are building. Event A happened, then event B happened, then event C happened.
Exactly. But a house isn't just load-bearing walls. You need the offline material to make it a home.
Right, the paint, the furniture.
Offline material, often carried by the imperfect tense or other forms, provides the background descriptions. It gives us the setting, the theological digressions, the explanations of why something happened. It fills out the model.
Okay.
If an author did not distinguish between mainline and offline material, if every single verb was an aorist, the reader's mental image would just become a flat, rapid-fire, undifferentiated jumble. Grounding provides cognitive depth perception.
It tells you what to focus on and what to hold in your peripheral vision.
Precisely.
To build on that architectural analogy, authors also use what SFL calls framing. They use temporal, spatial, and topical frames to set the boundaries of the mental model. When a gospel writer starts a paragraph with, "in the city," or "after these things," or "on the third day," that isn't just historical trivia.
No, it is an explicit cognitive instruction. It is the author telling the reader to update their mental focus.
Okay.
They are setting a new stage for the cognitive representation. Framing establishes the boundaries of the scene, and then cohesive ties, those reference chains we discussed earlier, ensure that the actors within that frame remain consistent.
Right.
You know exactly who the pronoun he refers to as the mental model updates clause by clause, moving through the theme ring progression.
Now, here's where things get incredibly technical and, frankly, completely revolutionary for anyone raised on traditional first-year Greek grammar.
It's a big shift.
I want to talk about prominence and what the literature calls zones of turbulence. Because we are not just building a static mental house, the author is directing our attention within it. How does an ancient author signal a theological climax or a point of high rhetorical tension?
They create a zone of turbulence.
Yeah.
This is a confluence of unexpected grammatical choices.
Unexpected.
Yes. The technical term is markedness. When an author breaks standard grammatical patterns and highly marked, unusual linguistic choices suddenly cluster together in one spot, it acts as a linguistic spotlight.
Wow.
It signals to the reader that they have reached a point of extreme significance. It forces the reader to stop scanning, pay closer attention, and deeply engage that specific part of the cognitive representation.
I want to tie this directly to the concept of verbal aspect in Koine Greek, because this is where SFL dismantles a lot of outdated seminary training.
Oh, definitely.
In traditional Greek classes, we are often taught that verbal aspect aorist, present, perfect, is merely a marker of objective time. The aorist is a past tense action. The present is happening right now. The future is tomorrow. It's a timeline.
A very rigid timeline.
But SFL, and modern linguistics in general, completely corrects this. SFL argues that verbal aspect is fundamentally a subjective semantic choice.
It is entirely subjective. Verbal aspect is not primarily about time. It's about how the author chooses to manipulate the audience's view of an action. It's a spatial choice, not a temporal one.
A spatial choice.
Yes. Do they want you to view the action as a summarized, complete whole? That is the perfective aspect, typically carried by the aorist.
Okay.
Or do they want you to view it from the inside as an unfolding, ongoing process? That is the imperfective aspect, carried by the present. It is a choice of perspective.
So to ask, when did this happen, is the wrong question.
Totally the wrong question.
The right question is, how does the author want me to look at this? The sources give a stunning example of this from the opening of 1 John. Let's look at 1 John 1.1, regarding the verbs for hearing and seeing. That which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes.
Yeah.
John chooses the perfect tense form for those verbs over the present or the aorist. Why? In traditional grammar, we might just say, well, it happened in the past with ongoing results. But SFL tells us that choosing the perfect aspect here creates something called heightened proximity. What does that mean?
Heightened proximity means John is intentionally drawing the action closer to the reader's cognitive space. The perfect tense is highly marked.
Marked, right.
By selecting it, John is pushing those specific sensory experiences, the actual hearing of Christ's voice, the physical seeing of him with their eyes, to the absolute forefront of the reader's mental model.
Wow.
He is refusing to let those events recede into the summarized past of the aorist. He's making those experiences appear more intense, more immediate, and far more significant to the foundation of his taxonomy.
So, if grounding uses the aorist as the structural skeleton, and the perfect tense acts as this intense spotlight to create heightened proximity, does that mean ancient Greek authors are directing our cognitive attention the exact same way a film director uses lighting and camera focus?
Think about the mechanics of filmmaking.
Yeah.
A director doesn't just set up a camera and hit record. They manipulate the lens to tell you how to feel.
Right. They blur the background to force you to look at the subject's face. They use a wide shot to show isolation. They use a tracking shot to build momentum.
And that is exactly what the Greek author is doing with grammar. The author is the director. The grammar is their camera equipment.
I love that.
When John chooses the perfect aspect in his opening verse, he is pulling the camera in for an extreme close-up on the eyes and ears of the apostles. When an author uses the aorist in a narrative, they're doing a wide tracking shot to advance the plot quickly.
Right.
When they create a zone of turbulence by fronting a circumstance and clustering march verbs, they are using a dramatic lighting shift to tell you, do not miss this. This is the climax of the scene.
It's brilliant.
SFL reveals that the biblical text is a masterful, precisely engineered social and cognitive tool.
This realization that the text is a precisely engineered tool for managing cognitive intake and social dynamics completely changes the ultimate goal of biblical scholarship, which brings us to the hermeneutical implications.
The big takeaway.
Right. This is the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener, whether you are a pastor, a student, or just someone who loves studying the Bible. SFL forces our exegesis to move far, far away from mere descriptive labeling.
It demands that we move beyond simply identifying the part to the engine. It is no longer enough to look at a clause and say, this is an aorist verb or this is a genitive absolute, and consider the job done.
Yeah, that's just identifying the parts of the camera.
Exactly. The new ultimate goal of exegesis under SFL is explanatory power.
Explanatory power, meaning we have to understand exactly why the author made this specific linguistic choice in this specific context.
Yes.
We have to assume that Paul or John or Luke had a massive menu of grammatical options available to them. Why did they select the specific combination of ideational, interpersonal, and textual resources?
That's the question we have to ask.
And how was that specific combination explicitly designed to impact the mental model and the social reality of their original audience?
SFL bridges the massive gap that has always existed between micro-level grammar and macro-level discourse. It allows us to seamlessly connect the parsing of a single isolated verb to the overarching theological and social argument of an entire epistle.
Right.
It forces us to ask how those three metafunctions are conspiring together in this exact moment to change the reader's mind, shift their allegiance, or demand their obedience.
It allows scholars, and really any dedicated reader of the text, to hear the Greek New Testament not as a dead document governed by rigid prescriptive rules. It rescues the text from the autopsy table.
It really does.
It reveals it as a living, social semiotic, a dynamic resource through which ancient authors intentionally, skillfully shape the realities, the theology, and the relationships of their communities.
And by systematically investigating these objective grammatical patterns, by mapping the transitivity, tracking the mood block, and observing the theme-rime flow, we can reconstruct that original environment of meanings with a level of precision that atomistic word studies simply cannot provide.
We can see the actual architecture of their thought.
Exactly.
It is a profound shift from merely asking, what does this word mean, to asking, what is this grammar doing to me?
Yeah.
And that brings us to our final thought for this deep dive.
A good place to land.
We started by comparing traditional parsing to dissecting a dead specimen. But if every grammatical choice in the Greek New Testament is a deliberate social action designed to build a specific mental model in your head, what happens when we read these texts merely as bulleted lists of theological facts? If you are just mining the epistles for abstract doctrines, what relational and social demands encoded deep within the grammar of the text might you be completely missing simply because you haven't looked at the architecture of the language?